early morning, September the 11th, 2001, at Logan Airport, Boston. A group of radical extremists board 2 passenger flights.
Our lives have changed, and they've changed because of what they did, and for no other reason why.
I don't think there's ever been, nor will there ever be, anything like that again.
Within an hour, they'll have crashed the planes they hijack into the iconic Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, causing thousands of fatalities.
They killed, murdered thousands of innocent people and sent the city into chaos.
And to see, people lose their lives like this was just, it was terrible, it was horrible.
The 9/11 attacks affected thousands of families on that September morning.
One doesn't expect to lose one's daughter. It's normally dad or mum who dies first, and that's something I've never really accepted. So yeah, it was hell.
A living hell for thousands upon thousands of innocent people.
This is how some of those stories unfolded, minute by minute. It's September the 11th in Manhattan. 6 a.m. Across the city and its surrounding areas, people are getting ready for the working day.
It was perfect blue skies. It was crisp air. It was maybe 70 degrees.
With the summer holidays just ended, the city was returning to normal.
September is a great time of the year. People are going back to school. People are back from vacations.
It's a really nice time. It's not too hot, it's not too humid, and it's a beautiful time of the year.
Great weather in New York in September still. Very busy place.
New York City was in the middle of a political battle.
We were having a primary election that day to determine who was going to be the Democratic candidate and Republican candidate for mayor of New York City. So I was sleeping late because I knew I was going to have a very long, late night.
But in the financial hub of Lower Manhattan, it was business as usual. Matt O'Mahony had worked with broker Cantor Fitzgerald since 1991.
His position there was a bond broker, and they were essentially a go-between between the government dealers that moved all the Treasury debt and stuff, and he worked for the Ginnie Mae desk up on the 105th floor.
Matt and Bobby were part of a close-knit Irish-American family.
We grew up in a middle-class town in Suffolk County out in Long Island. I was the oldest. Matt was 6. He was the youngest. He was the baby, and he was 6 years younger. But we had a very close relationship. We were, in addition to being brothers, I would say we were like best friends. We talked almost every day. Spent a lot of time together. In fact, we grew up in a 3-bedroom house with one sister, and we were relegated to 2 bunk beds in one room. So Matt and I shared a bunk bed, essentially, I would say, for like 3,000 nights together.
Matt was a successful and popular dealer, but not a great timekeeper.
Matt was notorious for getting to work a little late. In their business, they did a lot of entertaining. They had to take clients out, and Matt was the type of guy, he could stay out till 1 in the morning and answer the bell and be at his desk at 8 o'clock in the morning. That day, however, Matthew was on time.
Melanie DeVere from London was also in the Twin Towers that morning.
Melanie was a very bubbly personality. She was quite independent and actually lived up in London with her boyfriend at the time.
Melanie had just started a new job.
She was working for Risk Waters, who are a financial publications company in London, and she started at the sort of ground floor. She then got promoted, and that involved her then going on many overseas trips. And I'm pretty certain that the New York trip was pretty much her first trip involved in her newly promoted status.
Despite her parents' divorce, Melanie had remained very close to her father.
We used to talk a lot on the phone, and she rang me up about a week before she went to New York and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to New York. It's the first of my sort of newly promoted job responsibilities." And she told me all about the trip and basically how everything was tickety-boo.
Jeff Campbell was also a UK resident living in New York.
Jeff was very much the sort of sporty, academic one, didn't really have to try very hard at either of those and still excelled. He played chess to a good standard, played for England for 4 years at badminton. And, we were pretty close growing up, I guess, partly because of the age gap, but, we got on well as brothers.
Jeff had moved to the city in the late 90s.
An opportunity came up to get a permanent job with Reuters in New York. And so, I think it was 1999, he moved out to New York, big adventure, and started to work for Reuters.
Jeff appeared to be very happy in Manhattan.
I came out in January 2000 for a couple of months, and he seemed to be getting on well at work, met up with some of his mates, and he just met his fiancée Caroline. The last time I saw him, certainly to speak to face to face, was in August that year. He'd come back with Caroline, his fiancée, well, didn't know at the time, announced that he was going to get married. Usual whirlwind tour around the UK to see family and friends. And I think it was probably last week in August I saw him.
Paul Galligan's American dream had begun just days earlier. He'd come from London to work with brokers ICAP.
I came over with them just to start the US division, the equity derivatives division here in New York. And so when I arrived, it was the 4th of September, it was my first day at work.
He'd taken his newly arrived children around Manhattan.
We were driving past the towers and I said to the kids, I said, we'll go in there, that's where I'm going to work. We'll go in there one day because there's a restaurant at the top called Wonders on the World, and I've been there and I said I'm going to take over. Of course, we never got to do that.
7:35, Mohammed Atta and Abdulaziz Al Omari, also with 3 others, board Flight 11 at Boston's Logan Airport. Meanwhile, in the same airport, another 5 hijackers are preparing to board United Flight 175. In Rockland County, northwest of Manhattan, NYPD emergency team leader John Coughlin was also beginning his day. He was a sergeant in the emergency services unit.
When civilians need help, they call the police. When police need help, they call emergency service. Their motto is anything, anytime, anywhere.
John was a tough guy, a member of a crack team of police experts and a dedicated family man.
They were away from home a great deal. But when he was home, he made up for it.
That morning, John was out the door early.
It was the usual regular morning, got up, barreled around the house, was all set to leave for work. We did the usual, he said, gonna go, give the girls a kiss for me. And I did the usual, be careful, I love you. He said, love you too, and off he went.
Broker Joe Hart had worked in the city since 1986. For him, working in the World Trade Center had bittersweet memories. He'd been there for a previous terrorist incident.
I was on the 105th floor working for Cantor Fitzgerald at the time, and they had, it was early in the morning, and I actually was on the phone with Chicago, and then we just felt a giant concussion. I shouldn't say it moved you or it shook the walls, but you felt something.
In February 1993, Islamic extremists had detonated a truck bomb below the World Trade Center, killing 6 and injuring hundreds.
My manager came out and he said, there's some sort of explosion, just grab your gear and head to the stairways, which didn't really faze us because at times they would evacuate us actually twice prior to 93. And then at one point we got stuck and the smoke got really heavy. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm getting married in 3 months, and I just get me out of the building.
Matt had called me that day. I had worked uptown, and it took him 2.5 hours to walk out the building, all the way from the top.
New York was a resilient city, and the '93 bomb, while serious, was regarded by most as a hazard of living in a metropolis within the United States. Working in the Twin Towers was seen by those who worked there as an added bonus in an already exciting industry. As Joe Hart arrived on the morning of September the 11th, he bumped into some old friends.
I had changed companies in '96, and I was working on the 25th floor. But the guys that I had spent 8 years with up at the top of the building at Cantor Fitzgerald, I just happened to see 2 or 3 of them that morning. And it was a gorgeous morning. Said hello, stopped and said hello, and then I made my way up to the 25th floor.
One of the friends he met was Matthew O'Mahony. 7:59. American Airlines Flight 11 bound for Los Angeles departs from Logan International Airport in Boston. It's followed 15 minutes later by United Airlines Flight 175. Within an hour, both will have hit the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, inflicting the greatest ever terrorist attack on the American mainland.
Everyone ran to the window and saw the mess that was going on, and it was pretty ugly.
New York, 11th of September 2001, 8 a.m. Oblivious to the carnage about to hit their city, ordinary New Yorkers are heading to work on a glorious late summer morning. Policeman Raymond Suarez, known as Ray to his family, was leaving his home.
All I do remember is waking up and just seeing the back of his head as he left our bedroom.
Carmen and Ray had been together for some years. They'd had a daughter together. But Ray had left for Florida and a new career.
2 weeks later, he came back home. He said he couldn't be away from his daughter. And he came back to the NYPD. Ever since then, we were together since then. I just remember him going to our daughter's room and planting a kiss on her forehead. And that was the last time I saw of him.
8:15. On Flight 11, Mohammed Atta and his accomplices have taken over the cockpit of the plane and are redirecting it towards New York. Teresa Ashton worked for the president of the police union on Fulton Street, just blocks from the World Trade Center.
I took care of all the day-to-day activities, any of his scheduling, the cops coming in and out of the office, whatever they needed, organizing trips and, just day-to-day business.
As the business day moved into full swing, English businesswoman Melanie de Vere was getting ready for a meeting in the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
She was staying in a hotel in downtown New York, and as far as I'm aware, that she was going to this meeting in the morning, and that was the first of the meetings, to be quite honest. It was a pre-breakfast briefing before the main meeting that they were going to have. She never checked out of the hotel. She left the hotel to go to the meeting, and that was it.
8:20. Jeff Campbell was leaving his apartment for an appointment at the World Trade Center.
Caroline remembers him, not being able to find his pants or trousers for us, pants for Americans. And she recalls him leaving the flat, which is in Chelsea, around 16th Street, which, it's tight, but he could certainly make it to the World Trade Center and probably up to the floor he needed to go to on the 106th.
John Duffy, co-CEO of KBW Brokers, was headquartered in the South Tower. His son Christopher was also an employee of his firm and had gone to the office earlier that morning.
Christopher on the trading desk, the research and sales people would typically show up between 7 and 7:30. They had an internal sales meeting at 7:30 every morning.
That morning, John was running late. He'd been to an event close to home the night before, where a storm had messed up arrangements.
It happened to knock out the power at the country club, where we're having this event. It was a golf outing and then a dinner. And dinner got delayed by a couple hours because the kitchen was not working.
8:30. American Airlines Flight 11 bound for Los Angeles has been hijacked and is en route to New York. It is closely followed by United Airlines Flight 175. Their target, the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan, center of commerce and symbol of American financial strength. For broker Brian Mulligan, there was a strong personal connection with the building.
My late dad worked on the building. He was a construction worker. He was a steam fitter, local 638. He spent 3 years there, so I knew firsthand everything about that building, probably more than I should have. As my dad got older and he saw that I continued to work on different occasions in those buildings, he said, I understand you have to work in them, but please do me the favor. Don't ever bring my grandchildren into the building.
By 20 to 9, most of the workers of the 50,000 or so people who worked at the Twin Towers were at their desks. In her office, Teresa Ashton was on the phone to a colleague.
As I'm talking to him, I'm looking out my window. We were on the 17th floor, and I saw a plane go past my window.
8:46. Flight 11 smashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, vaporizing as it enters.
All of a sudden, the building, we felt a giant concussion, and the building started moving towards the Hudson River.
I just thought it was thunder, which I didn't really, think, oh, well, it was such a beautiful day or something, but, I just thought it was thunder.
As the building recoiled, it was very violent, and it shuddered to a standstill.
Within seconds, I don't know how long, but all the paper started streaming down past my window.
At that point, everyone ran to the window and saw the mess that was going on, and it was pretty ugly.
And I had looked to my left towards the river, and a friend of mine stood up and he said, "What the heck was that?" And I saw a piece of the fuselage of the plane come down. We have these telephone turrets, and it has, hundreds of buttons on it from all the large banks and broker-dealers, and they were ringing. off the hook, like, what happened? What's going on? Get out of there. And I'm like, I'm fine, don't worry about it.
A lot of people, you know, in the room, the trading floor, jumped up and went over to the windows. I didn't, but, you know, they saw bodies then that had been blown out, were on buildings below.
People jumping out the window. We saw papers all over the place.
Further up the building, Matt O'Mahony was trapped above the impact on the 105th floor. He called his mother.
He told my mother to put the TV on. He says he didn't know what was in store for her, that he loved her, and he'll always love her.
This is a live picture from our camera on the Empire State Building looking toward the World Trade Center.
We went live at 8:51, I think is when we first hit the air. From that moment forward, everything is about gathering information, verifying information, gathering pictures, and putting them into the pipeline so I can put them on TV.
In the tower, reactions were mixed.
There was a sense of panic because I had been up there in '93, and then my first thought was just to get out.
I phoned my wife. I didn't have a cell phone, so I just let her know, look, you may see something on the news. I said, I'm in the other building and I'm gonna walk down.
When I was falsely confident that the building was going to be fine, I called my wife, and I couldn't get her. So then I called the neighbor and I said, look, I'm fine. I'm going to wait up here because I'm sensing panic. I know a plane hit the building. Hung up the phone. I said, I'm on my way home.
On the ground, the reaction was just as confused.
8:46, you know, somebody shrieks. I'm down at 45 Broadway, and you know, somebody shrieked that a plane had just gone into the World Trade Center.
As many began to evacuate the North Tower, others, following instructions, went back to their desks. There was much worse to come.
The inspector walked into the office and yelled for everyone to get suited up into uniform. He said, we're at war.
New York, 11th of September 2001. A plane has hit one of the iconic twin towers of the World Trade Center. For the moment, there is relative calm as workers and observers try to assess the seriousness of the incident. Broker Paul Galligan, who'd begun work in the center just the week before, was making his way out.
So I walked down to the 44th floor. That was a big mezzanine level. So when I walked in there, you saw a TV, you could see a big gaping hole in the other tower. And, you know, I kind of thought, that's not good. There was a guy with a megaphone, a Port Authority guy, who, as people piled in, that floor got really, really crowded. And I think he was worried about people getting crushed or whatever, and he said, you know, you need to go back up, this building's secure. And everybody should return to their office. I just decided, you know, I'm going to get the heck out of here because there's really no reason for me here. And I just started to move towards the to the stairwell, and we got hit.
9:03 a.m. A second jet slams into the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors.
Building shook, and everybody ran from the side of the building where it had hit the other way. You almost instantly smelt the fumes, you know, the gasoline. And I guess all that fireball or all that gasoline went down the elevator shafts and kind of permeated into the different floors.
And then all of a sudden, as I'm speaking, there's this massive explosion from the other tower, which doesn't make any sense to me at the time.
There's another explosion down the left side on the second World Trade Center tower. You see that huge ball of fire that just went up there. I know it's quite a distant shot, but that looked to me to be happening at number 2 World Trade Center.
So all of a sudden we hear a loud screeching noise, and we look up at the screens and we see a giant fireball, because we didn't see the second plane go in, but we saw the explosion, and we heard it and we felt the concussion of it. And then a couple of us said, oh boy, because we thought it was bombs in the building from the way it looked and the way it was on camera. So we were sort of panicked because we were like, if there's bombs here, we should have gotten out.
In Brooklyn, Sergeant Ed Mullins was at work monitoring radio communications.
Chaos, total chaos of, you know, people calling for all kinds of assistance. And along with this occurred, more and more things would happen. You'd have people jumping out windows, so you would hear that coming over the radio. They'd, people are jumping from the building. They kept asking for more fire, more emergency personnel, and it was just calling everybody was what was happening.
On Staten Island, Sergeant Vincent Guida was heading to his office.
You could see the big plume of smoke head towards Staten Island. It was a scary sight.
In Brooklyn, as with every precinct in the city, the emergency response began.
The inspector walked into the office and yelled for everyone to get suited up into uniform. He said, "We're at war."
We were sent immediately to the Staten Island Yankee Stadium because that was supposed to be the focal point for the any injured persons to land. They were going to use the evac and then land helicopters with injured people at the stadium. And I think the next step was to transport to Staten Island hospitals out of the city, but no one ever came.
John Duffy was in his car listening to the radio. He'd already heard about the first plane.
A report came on that a second plane had hit the Trade Center. My initial reaction was, same wire must have got sent out twice. What's the odds of two planes hitting the Trade Center? At that point, I realized this was a commercial jet.
9:15. At NY1, the newsroom moved into high gear. It was clear that this was a disaster of major proportions.
This time, the assignment desk is mobilizing whatever resources we have, so that live truck that was not far away to cover the primary election is now packing up and rolling as fast as they can toward the World Trade Center, not realizing at that time what kind of danger was ahead.
In both towers, the imperative was to get out fast.
The first thing I thought of, I said, there was no thought of heroics or anything. I thought, I've got 5 kids, I'm getting the hell out of here. I was walking, so we headed for the stairs, and it was pretty orderly, and it was slow going, because everybody's filtering in from the floors below, so it's not like you're just, leaping down the stairs. We walked down, and it probably took about 20 minutes, and it was pretty calm until we got close to the end, and then people started to get jumpy, because they're almost out, but they're not out. So I would say, we got to like the 10th floor, 9th floor. Come on, keep moving. There was a lot of that kind of crowd.
Joe Hart was also reaching the ground floor.
When first we tried to go out the West Street side, and they turned us back, and we could see a lot of things falling. There was actually, they had pulled some tarps over some of the bodies out there. We didn't really realize what they were at the time.
Elsewhere, the US government and its agencies were responding. With fear of a full-scale attack and news of additional potential hijackings, air traffic across the United States was beginning to be grounded. Their worst fears were confirmed at 9:37 with news of a plane hitting the Pentagon in Washington. But on the ground all over New York, law enforcement officers were experiencing frustration.
We had hundreds and hundreds of cops lined up, ready to go and get involved. But in this particular instance, there was very little we could do. This was an operation that required, heavy equipment personnel.
What the public fails to realize now, with the benefit of hindsight, is that now we know the attacks were over with the crashing of those planes. But at that time, we didn't know that. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop, and we had many concerns.
John Duffy, knowing his son Christopher and tens of colleagues were in the South Tower, was still heading towards Lower Manhattan.
At this point, fire engines had started to come out of the firehouses in Manhattan, all sorts of emergency vehicles. So I figured my best chance of getting down there was go park the car. I headed west and wound up at a hotel across the street from Madison Square Garden, 33rd and 7th Avenue. Had a phone bank still there, hard to find today. Line of people waiting to use the phones. I eventually got to a phone, called home. One of my daughters picked up the phone. She clearly was watching it on TV. They were trying to figure out which tower they were looking at, and she asked me, which tower had the TV antenna.
An hour after the first plane had hit the North Tower, emergency vehicles were still heading towards the World Trade Center, their personnel streaming selflessly into the buildings in acts of extraordinary heroism.
I just remember the faces of the firemen coming up, these young kids. And there was 2 plainclothes detectives that came up, and they had their badges on, little strings around their necks. And they were coming up pretty quickly.
It's incredible to think of those guys, when everybody else is moving away from danger, for them to move towards danger. It's not a natural thing to do, so, they're incredible people.
Raymond Suarez was one of them.
He ran into the building to help, and he was just taking people out. And I do recall a friend of his saying, "Ray, the buildings are gonna collapse, get out of there, get out." He said, "Those buildings are not gonna fall, I gotta go in, I gotta go help people."
But Ray was in the most dangerous place imaginable.
He was in Tower 2. He was in the lower mezzanine. The last woman that he was able to take out of the building was a woman that was pregnant.
John Coughlin and his emergency team were also in the center of the rescue. One of the younger members had been dispatched from the building.
He didn't want to go, but he went out, and apparently he was turned around to go back with the equipment when the towers started falling.
Knowing his brother was in the North Tower, Bobby O'Mahony rushed out of his own office.
So I went downstairs. I was across the street, and I'll never forget this. I was looking up at the tower, and it kind of reminded me of a King Kong movie where King Kong's at the top of a burning building. And this is a real-life King Kong story.
In the UK, the news of events in New York was spreading fast.
I was working in my office, and I suddenly had a shout from one of my fellow employees, saying, David, you've got to go and look at the television. Something amazing is happening in New York. And so I went and looked at the television, and I saw, as everyone else in the world saw, what was happening live.
Matt Campbell was on holiday with his family in the Canaries.
I was in Lanzarote with my family. We were on holiday. We were on the beach, two young children, and my wife had gone off to go and get some food or a drink for one of the girls. And she came back down and sort of said, I think something big, bad's happening in America, because it's on all the television screens.
It didn't twig that my daughter was involved. It never even entered my mind. I just thought this was something that was happening in New York, which is terrible, and sort of almost pushed it to one side.
Journalist Beth Fertig was 2 blocks from the World Trade Center, trying to get closer.
A police officer stopped me and said, "You can't go any further." And I showed her my press badge and I had my microphone, and I said, "Why?" And she said, "I'm doing this to protect your life." And as if on cue, as soon as she said that, the first South Tower started to collapse.
9:58. The South Tower collapses.
I didn't turn around. I knew it was falling, but I chose not to look at it. That was when it really, I broke down in tears, and because I realized in that instant how many people had died.
All of a sudden I heard like this big loud noise. These windows were shattering and people started shrieking. I turned around and I saw a sea of human beings just running towards me.
Emergency rescuer John Coughlin was in the tower.
They know that John was on the 20th floor landing, rescuing people. They know from radio transmissions what he was doing. And all I can say is he must have been in a really hot spot, because they never recovered any of him or the rest of his team.
Somehow I get into this pizza parlor and I get inside, and I honestly at this point I think I'm going to die, because I didn't know what it was. I thought the country was being attacked.
I was going to walk downtown and didn't know what else to do when the first tower came down.
This enormous cloud of debris, brown cloud, just swirling our way, and people started running away from it.
It was just, it looked like a bad kind of science fiction movie to see this thing literally collapse. And, I was not the only person on that corner looking south. I mean, I think basically everybody in Manhattan, it was just kind of took the air out of everybody's lung. There was just a collective, reaction.
10:28. Half an hour after the South Tower, the North Tower collapses, leaving Manhattan bereft of its most iconic landmark. For the United States, it is a tragedy beyond comprehension. For the families of those involved, the heartbreak was only beginning.
It was hell. And, one doesn't expect to lose one's daughter. It's normally dad or mum who dies first, and that's something I've never really accepted. So, yeah, it was hell.
Lower Manhattan, New York City, September the 11th, 2001, 10:30. Within 90 minutes, 2 hijacked planes have hit the iconic Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. Both towers have collapsed. There has been catastrophic loss of life. All air traffic is grounded across the United States, and the US military is on high alert. For families all over the region and all over the world, though, whose loved ones have gone to work on that late summer morning, the tragedy is only beginning. In London, David De Vere was hearing news of his daughter Melanie from her employers.
We're sorry about this, but as far as we are aware, all of our staff at the meeting were in the basic implosion of the building, and no one has survived. And that's when I sort of almost had a nervous breakdown, to be quite frank. It was hell. And, one doesn't expect to lose one's daughter. It's normally dad or mum who dies first, and that's something I've never really accepted. So, yeah, it was hell.
In Lanzarote, Matt Campbell had located a payphone and was trying to contact his brother Rob.
I eventually spoke to Rob, maybe half an hour later, but that was with all the family around me, from this payphone. And Rob just said, he was there, he's obviously in a very distraught state, and I just remember dropping the phone. And at that moment, just knowing that he was dead, basically, or very good chance he was dead.
For many, the simple practicalities of getting home or contacting their families were proving extremely difficult. Having left the buildings, Joe Hart had found a phone box.
I just got an operator, and I tried to call collect, and I got my father in Carolina, and I told him I got out of the building, and he was relieved, but my wife still hadn't heard from me at all. So I said, can you do me a favor? Can you call the Allendale, my local town police, because it's a tiny town, we know them all, because no one could get through up north any phone calls. So he got them, and they sent somebody over to the house, and unfortunately they jumbled the message. They didn't give the message right to my wife, so until she saw me, she didn't know what had happened to me. One of our good neighbors was at the house when she had heard, and her husband said, you better take her inside and tell her that the buildings came down. So she took Joanne inside, and sorry.
At NY1, Pat Kiernan's job took on a new and more urgent approach.
The commercial break that we took just before the report of the smoke at the top of the World Trade Center was the last commercial break that our 24-hour news channel took for 3 weeks. We went 24/7 around the clock, commercial-free for 3 weeks after that moment.
Joe Hart eventually managed to get on one of the trains travelling north out of the city.
Made it home. The trains were all packed and delayed. People were just trying to get on any train. I just walked home, and my wife, she hadn't come home yet because they had closed school, so they went and picked the children up at school. They were young at the time, and she was happy to see me, but it was just a bad moment.
Realising hope for survivors was remote, arrangements were made for the remains of those who were recovered.
When we realized the extent of what we were dealing with and how many missing, unidentified, lost that we had, the morgue facility obviously would not be able to handle that type of capacity. So we had to set up temporary morgues. Even in addition to the temporary morgues, when we were removing the debris, that all needed to be sifted through carefully because you're looking for evidence, you're looking for property, you're looking for, of course, human remains. And that couldn't be done at the same time as you're trying to rescue individuals. So you had to remove debris as quickly as possible. There's a potential that you could have remains in there. So the debris was being transported to Staten Island. This is after we got the routine down. And at Staten Island, we set up a sifting operation with heavy equipment where we would go through we'd spread the material out, and detectives would take rakes and go through it, and we would find human remains.
But for many, the identification was to be a slow and tortuous process.
There have been 6 body parts recovered. The first, I think, identification was in June 2002. And we've had 3 tranches of his body parts being identified. And the most recent one was actually last year, in May.
In the weeks and months that followed, New York gradually returned to some sense of normality. But for so many survivors, there were funerals and memorials to be attended.
We had a wake, memorial service for him. But obviously the following year, we were able to actually bury what little came back of him.
For some, like Patty Coughlin, though, there were no remains to bury, making grieving all the harder.
Brought the 3 girls into the living room and sat down. And truly the hardest thing I have ever done and hope to ever do. I had to tell them that I gave up hope and that Daddy wasn't coming back. So they didn't want to accept it initially. They just started screaming and yelling because if I gave up hope and had him declared dead, that means they had to give up hope.
And for others, like Carmen Suarez, when the pain came, it did so at a time which only compounded the misery.
On December 19, they found his body, which was very hard. because I had to say goodbye to him 4 days before Christmas.
Now the dead are remembered at the 9/11 memorial, where water cascades into 2 pools on the site of the Twin Towers. It provides a focal point for families and friends of the thousands who died, and a permanent reminder of what happened that day.
He's in a corner, which is in the northeast corner of the Tower 1, and his name is in there, and it's engraved with a number of people, close friends that he worked with. I like to get down when it's private, you know, just to like reflect and stuff, because it's a powerful feeling, the pool down there. It's like a serenity.
For the bereaved, it's not outrage, but a sense of futility which dominates their memories of those they lost on September the 11th, 2001.
There was 8 cars left at the train station that night, 8 people in our town and some of the little towns, some in New Jersey that lost their mums and dads that day.
He was a hero. He was a true hero. And there are so many people that are alive because of him. There are mothers that have their children, and there are parents that have their children because of him. Because those people were able to go home. The woman that he saved had a little girl, and she's able to have her mommy. And I do take comfort that he died the way I knew he would have wanted to die.
He was in the prime of life, to be quite frank. She was 30 years old, still young by today's standards, beautiful, had a steady relationship with a boyfriend. She had the whole world ahead of her, and it just all came crashing down.